Okay, and then if we, I suppose, if we have a look here at again the ROI of open source API testing with SOAP UI and commercial products like Ready API. Now, like the figures that we have here, we'll be able to go through them at a high level, but with open source tools, you may have some initial setup costs. So again, whether this is hardware, software, personnel that's required to get involved within the project, you may be talking, again, depending on the team sizes, you may be talking in around 10,000 euro or dollars there. So the licensing, the initial licensing costs and not having those with open source tools can be a huge factor for organizations. And again, this would depend on the size of the number of APIs that you have. So the API development, the API testing strategy, the scale of that, size of the organization. But then after this, we would have some maintenance costs per year, the reallocation of resources. So again, having the resources available there that can maintain the open source tooling and kind of run those projects. So yeah, like from this example here, with regards kind of maintenance, resource allocation, you might be talking in around kind of 75,000 per year. And compare that to the likes of a commercial tooling, where if we have a look here at 50,000 per year. Now, just to let you know that that's not the cost of a Ready API license. So the figures that we'd have here would be for kind of larger teams of maybe 25 to 40 users. And they would have licensing of maybe floating licenses that can be shared between different user groups and CI/CD pipelines. So while we have 50,000 here, that would be supporting a large team for API testing.
Yeah, so I'm sure our sales teams would love if it was $50,000 for one license, but that's not the case. So don't worry, as Adrian said, that number is indicating multiple licenses, multiple modules. Just jump in there, Adrian, and kind of segue maybe into a question that Shilpa has asked that is related to this. So Shilpa has asked, is Ready API a SaaS solution? So it's not. So it's an on-premise solution. It is a desktop application like SOAP UI. The way that the licensing model works, which is relevant for this number here, is that you have the idea of a fixed license or a floating license, and a fixed license would be a license that is tied to a particular user. So the users of Ready API would have what we call a SmartBear ID, which you can think of like single sign-on, so an email address and a password. And a fixed license for Ready API would be tied to that individual user. So only that user could use that license. Then you have a floating license, which was used in the calculation here. So it's a little bit more expensive, but it's more flexible because more than one individual user can make use of that license at different times. So you might have, Adrian is an engineer and he's using the floating license on Monday. Then I make use of it on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, a GitHub action pipeline that's running these tests checks out that license as well. So you can use it for both, individual testing needs, as well as automation use cases as well. So not a SaaS tool. It is on premise or desktop or whatever term you want to use there. Thanks, Adrian.
And there is a very useful Ready API ROI calculator that was posted in to the chat. So that's something that you can have a look at. You can play around with yourself. So you can customize that to see, okay, the number of people performing the tests, the annual cost of QA, salaries. So you can go into a bit of depth there about what your current, I suppose, costs are for resources, for staff, the testing needs, and that can give you some figures there on potential ROI. So that's a very good example that you can kind of play around with. And what we're talking about here is, obviously very high level, but I suppose the main thing from these slides is that with regards the maintenance costs of open source tooling compared to commercial tools, the maintenance costs, while there mightn't be actual licensing costs, the maintenance costs may be higher with regards kind of resources and, you know, the certain testers or certain skill levels that are needed for kind of maintenance and use of some of the open source tooling. So licensing costs with commercial tools, however, overall maintenance costs may be lower. Okay, so having a look, so that's the initial ROI. Then again, we have some examples that, you know, benefits and savings here. We would have talked through some of these while going through kind of previous slides. But, you know, time savings, you know, with the likes of the open source tooling like SoapUI, there's manual effort involved, reduced downtime. When we're looking at the commercial offerings here as well, again, reduced downtime can be a huge one, increased productivity and improved quality. So improved quality, well, that might be 20,000 per year here, just at this kind of very high level information. That can be a lot higher. So if I suppose we have improved quality, but if there is any issues with quality and the loss of kind of revenue and the impact from that side with regards kind of reputation and quality, that can have a huge impact there. So improved quality, improved productivity. So having a more efficient API testing strategy, having it easily integrated with your CI/CD pipeline, so that whenever there's a new deployment of code, your end-to-end testing workflows can just kick off whenever there's new deployment, and you know straight away, okay, everything's working as expected, nothing's broken, and faster release cycles. You know, that can all lead to that goal of kind of faster release cycles with your software applications.
I think, you know, a lot of these you know, numbers and metrics can be a little bit abstract when we're not, you know, kind of looking at the tool or looking at the application. But maybe just to I'll try and call out one or two things to maybe make this more real. You know, we talk about the productivity or increased productivity. Like, how does that actually, you know, when you break that down, what does that actually mean? Where does that increase speed? You know, if we think about it in terms of how fast you're writing your tests, how fast you know, debugging, etc. Like, that really comes down to, or one thing that comes down to would be, like, for example, Ready API's user interface versus SoapUI's user interface, right? So anyone who's used SoapUI before, you'll know, you know, this is no disrespect to SoapUI, but you know, it's not always the best user experience where if you click on a particular project element, that project element will open up in a kind of pop-up window in another part of the app. And the more project elements you kind of navigate to, the more pop-ups you end up with. Doesn't always make for the kind of speediest way of navigating through an application. So Ready API removes that. You don't have that with Ready API. It's a bit of a more intuitive, you know, experience navigating through the app. The other thing is, or another thing that relates to your increased productivity is, again, if you're already a user of SoapUI, you will be aware of the fact that your tests are made up of test steps. So, you know, you have a list of these test steps, and a test step might be something like send a request or, you know, editing a header or something like that. Ready API has more out of the box test steps than SoapUI. So in theory, you know, there is less scripting that a user has to do to write the test that they need using Ready API, and you extrapolate that, to use a nice big word, that can result in faster, you know, faster testing, faster debugging, increased productivity. So again, you know, don't just take our word for it. If you're familiar with SoapUI, but you weren't familiar with Ready API, I definitely recommend taking a look at it. But yeah, but there was just maybe an attempt to maybe connect some of these numbers down to what's the user actually seeing on the screen in front of them, and how does that kind of translate back up to these savings and these benefits.
Yeah. And I can see a question there from Shilpa, just with regards liking to discuss a bit more on the commercial side. So that's something, what we can do, we can reach out after today's session and we can discuss that in a bit more detail. I'm conscious, I know we've just run over the allotted kind of 45 minutes. There is another slide, Joe, that I'd just like to potentially get to, one or two more slides. So there's one with regards factors in choosing the API solution. So that's something with regards making an informed decision. So it'll be, I think, two more from here.